From PSYOP to MindWar, The Psychology of Victory. By Colonel Paul E. Vallely, Commander with Major Michael A. Aquino, PSYOP Research and Analysis Team Leader. Headquarters, 7th Psychological Operations Group, United States Army Reserve, Presidio of San Francisco, California 1980. Introduction by Michael A. Aquino, Lieutenant Colonel, Military Intelligence, United States Army Reserve, retired November 2003. In the later 1970s, psychological operations doctrine in the U.S. Army had yet to fully emerge from the disappointment and frustration of the Vietnam War. Thus it was that in 1980 Colonel Paul Valley, footnote 1, later Major General U.S. Army Reserve Commander of the 7th PSYOP Group, asked me, as his headquarters PSYOP Research and Analysis FA Team Leader, to draft a paper that would encourage some future thought within the PSYOP community. He did not want a Vietnam post-mortem, but rather some fresh and innovative ideas concerning PSYOP's evolution and application. I prepared an initial draft which Colonel Valley reviewed and annotated, which resulted in revised drafts and critiques until he was satisfied, and the result of that was this paper, From PSYOP to MindWar, The Psychology of Victory. Footnote 2. The term MindWar was coined by another PSYOP officer, Colonel Richard Sutter, and myself in 1977. After seeing the recent film Star Wars, we played with a modification of its name as a futuristic replacement for the somewhat bland Army designation Psychological Operations. An avowedly science-fictional treatment of MindWar, complete with a caricature of Sutter at the helm, appears in my Star Wars story The Dark Side, available at www.zircure.org/maquino. Colonel Valley sent copies of it to various government offices, agencies, commands, and publications involved or interested in PSYOP. He intended it not as an article for publication, not simply as a talking paper to stimulate dialogue. In this it was quite successful, judging by the extensive and lively letters he received concerning it over the next several months. That should have been the end of MindWar, a minor staff study which had done its modest job. With the arising of the Internet in the 1980s, however, MindWar received an entirely unexpected, and somewhat comic, resurrection. Allusions to it gradually proliferated, with its sinister title quickly winning it the most lurid conspiracy theory reputation. The rumor mill soon had it transformed into an Orwellian blueprint for Manchurian candidate mind control and world domination. My own image as an occult personality added fuel to the wildfire. MindWar was now touted by the lunatic fringe as conclusive proof that the Pentagon was awash in black magic and devil worship. Now that this absurd comic opera has at least somewhat subsided, I thought that it might be interesting to make a complete and accurate copy of the paper available, together with an introduction and some historical hindsight annotations to place it in reasonable context. After all, it did, and perhaps still does, have something worthwhile to say. Within the U.S. military, PSYOP has habitually been relegated to a backseat as a force multiplier. The principal strategic decisions are made in consideration of traditional political and military interests and goals. Only then is PSYOP invited to the table, to help achieve already agreed upon missions more effectively. MindWar reverses this sequence. Psychological means for achieving victory, essentially through convincing the enemy that he really wants to bring his national policies into harmony with ours, are fashioned in support of basic political goals. The use of ordinary military force, bombs, bullets, etc. is regarded as a last resort in circumstances wherein MindWar itself fails. The advantage of MindWar is that it conducts wars in non-lethal, non-injurious, and non-destructive ways. Essentially, you overwhelm your enemy with argument. You seize control of all of the means by which his government and populace process information to make up their minds, and you adjust it so that those minds are made up as you desire. Everyone is happy, no one gets hurt or killed, and nothing is destroyed. Ordinary warfare, on the other hand, is characterized by its lack of reason. The antagonists just maim or kill each other's people, and steal or destroy each other's land, until one side is hurt so badly that it gives up, or both sides are hurt so badly that they agree to stop short of victory. After such a war there is lasting misery, hate, and suffering. The only loser in MindWar are the war profiteers, companies and corporations which grow fat on orders for helicopters, tanks, guns, munitions, etc. Consequently, what President Dwight Eisenhower referred to as the military/industrial complex can be counted upon to resist the implementation of MindWar as the governing strategic conflict doctrine. That's the MindWar prospectus in its most simplified form. While in the 1980s I had no reason to think that this paper had had any official effect on U.S. PSYOP doctrine within or beyond the Army, it was with some fascination that I saw specific of its prescriptions applied during the First Gulf War, and recently even more obviously, during the 2003 invasion of Iraq. In both instances extreme PSYOP was directed both against the object of the attack and upon U.S. domestic public perception and opinion. In 2003 to the extent of embedding journalists with military units to inevitably channel their perspectives and perceptions. The impact of even these minor techniques of MindWar was remarkable. A psychological climate of inexorable U.S. victory was created and sustained in both the United States and Iraq, which accelerated the victory on the ground. Somewhat less positively, the failure of MindWar in this instance to be guided by only the most rigorous principles of truth and ethics has just as inexorably led to a substantial post-victory evaporation of that euphoric climate. Therein lies the Achilles heel of MindWar. Invoking as it does the most intense emotions and commitments of its audiences, it must deliver the goods as they are judged by the target audiences. If the ethical values of those audiences are not respected, if MindWar is used only in the service of ulterior motives and objectives, the resulting disintoxication can be socially shattering. In 1987 I wrote a more extensive research paper for the National Defense University concerning the ethics of PSYOP. Particularly if MindWar is actually to be employed as a feature of U.S. foreign policy, I cannot stress too strongly the need for its subordination to the strictest and most enlightened principles of humanity as discussed in that paper. Psychological Operations. The ethical dimension is also available for download at www.zircure.org/m-Aquino. Now let's take a look at the 1980 MindWar paper itself. In addition to its original footnotes which generally identify quote sources, I have added a few new ones to highlight/critique some of its themes. These new footnotes are identified in May 2003 at their beginning. From PSYOP to MindWar, The Psychology of Victory. Lieutenant Colonel John Alexander's Military Review article in support of psychotronics intelligence and operational employment of ESP was decidedly provocative. Footnote 3. Alexander, Lieutenant Colonel John B. The New Mental Battlefield. Beam Me Up Spock in Military Review, Volume LX. Note, December 12, 1980. Criticism of research in this area, based as it is on existing frontiers of scientific law, brings to mind the laughter that greeted the Italian scientist Spallanzani in 1794 when he suggested that bats navigate in the dark by means of what we now call sonar. If they see with the ears, then do they hear with their eyes? Went the joke, but I suspect that the U.S. Navy is glad someone took the idea seriously enough to pursue it. Footnote 4. The May 2003 Alexander later colonel was involved with parapsychological ideas and experiments such as ESP and remote viewing. These have no connection whatever with either traditional PSYOP or MindWar. Cf. My paper Project Stargate. $20 million up in smoke and mirrors at www.zircure.org/m-Aquino. Psychotronic research is in its infancy, but the U.S. Army already possesses an operational weapons system designed to do what Lieutenant Colonel Alexander would like ESP to do, except that this weapons system uses existing communications media. It seeks to map the minds of neutral and enemy individuals and then to change them in accordance with U.S. national interests. It does this on a wide scale, embracing military units, regions, nations, and blocks. In its present form it is called Psychological Operations PSYOP. Does PSYOP work, or is it merely a cosmetic with which field commanders would rather not be bothered? Had the question been asked in 1970, the answer would have been that PSYOP works very well indeed. In 1967 and 1968 alone, the total of 29,276 armed Viet Cong/NDV.A. the equivalent of 95 enemy infantry battalions surrendered to ARVN or MACV forces under the Choose Hoi Amnesty Program, the major PSYOP effort in the Vietnam War. At the time the MACV estimated that the elimination of that same number of troops in combat would have cost us 6,000 dead. Footnote 5. Choose Hoi, the winning ticket, The ACD Command Information Pamphlet 6-69, March 1969. On the other hand, we lost the war, not because we were outfought, but because we were outfought. Our national will to victory was attacked more effectively than we attacked that of the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, and perception of this fact encouraged the enemy to hang on until the United States finally broke and ran for home. So our PSYOP failed. It failed not because its principles were unsound, but rather because it was outmatched by the PSYOP of the enemy. The Army's efforts enjoyed some impressive successes, but our own PSYOP did not really change the minds of the enemy populace, nor did it defend the U.S. populace at home against the propaganda of the enemy. Furthermore, the enemy PSYOP was so strong that it, not bigger armies or better weapons, overcame all of the Cobras and Spookies and A.C.A.V.S and B-52s we fielded. The lesson is not to ignore our own PSYOP capability, but rather to change it and strengthen it so that it can do precisely that kind of thing to our enemy in the next war. Better hardware is nice, but by itself it will change nothing if we do not win the war for the mind. The first thing it is necessary to overcome is a view of PSYOP that limits it to routine, predictable, over-obvious, and hence marginally effective leaflet and loudspeaker applications. Battlefield devices of this sort have their place, but it should be that of aid and accessory to the main effort. That the main effort cannot begin at the company or division level, it must originate at the national